So great to be back with you. I regret that I have only been making the March meetings recently, but this is a fantastic meeting, and it is so good to see the senior members of this group to anchor the culture of the group, and the young members of the group to bring new life to this group. So it's a great mix, and I'm glad you have chosen to come this time. There's so much that I could talk about. I mean, literally so much that I could talk about. And of course, Michelle always says, send your stuff in, send your stuff in. And I always use the excuse that my slide set's too big, can't send it. But it's really because I change stuff all the time. I was sitting back there changing things as I heard the conversation around the room yesterday, because we could go off on so many different angles. And while this is not an AMA commercial, it will feel like it to some of you probably. That's not the intent. But the intent, in part, is to educate, enlighten, stimulate some conversation around a few of these topics. But also, to the extent that I can, I want to give you some sense of hope for the profession and for healthcare in general. We talked last night, and there are many physicians, and we're going to talk about burnout a little bit, we talked about it yesterday, that don't see any light at the end of the tunnel, that don't think we have any opportunity to influence the way healthcare is evolving. And I just think that is categorically wrong. Do we get everything our way all the time? Not a chance. Nobody does. But if we engage and we are focused in our message to whatever stakeholder that needs to go to, whether that's Congress or the administration or a health plan or the public, I think we can, in fact, move the needle. And again, is it exactly the way we would do it if we could design the whole system? Probably not, but we do what we can. So I'm going to cover a lot of territory. I may pause once or twice along the way to talk, but I'm going to really do my darndest to get through these slides and let's have some time for dialogue. Just for frame of reference, the two hats that I wear, one is with Mercy. I'm Director of Regional Operations for Mercy in Southwest Missouri, which is in the Springfield area. Mercy has a 4-state footprint. Main headquarters is in St. Louis. We have sub-regional headquarters in Oklahoma City, Springfield, and a little bit along the western side of Arkansas. This is another representation of that, and this is the area in which Phil and Angie and I have our existence. The other hat I wear is AMA. You know, I'm president of the AMA. AMA, I would describe as a convening organization. It is the way to bring the diverse voices and perspectives of physicians together and find that common ground that we can then advocate and potentially make a difference. The AMA, from a policy development standpoint, functions at 2 meetings a year, one in June and one in November. We bring together representatives of 190 state and specialty societies, 50 state obviously, 140 specialty societies send one or more representatives to the House of Delegates. I'll talk about that a little more, but they represent every practice stage, every practice setting, every geography, every specialty of any relevance. It is the only organization in this country that has the opportunity to do that on behalf of our professions, on behalf of our patients, on behalf of the health system writ large. It is the oldest and the largest physician organization in the country, national physician organization in the country. We now have over 220,000 members. We've had 7 straight years of growth, which is unprecedented for the AMA. That followed about 40 years of progressive annual declines. I think there are several reasons for that, which we might touch on as we go along. 1,000 physicians come together in June and November to discuss policy. We have, that's the shot of the board, me obviously in the middle as president. On my immediate left, Jerry Harmon, family practice physician from South Carolina, is chair of the board. So we have a family physician as president and a family physician chair of the board simultaneously at the helm of the AMA. We have 3 other family physicians on the board. So of the 21 people on there, 18 are physicians. There's 1 student, 1 resident, and 1 public member out of the 21. 18 other physicians on the board, 5 are family docs. Significant influence. I talked some yesterday informally with people about, so what's, who influences the AMA, and I would suggest to you that it is a very good balance. The primary care docs sometimes think the specialties are running it, specialists think the primary care docs are running it. They're both kind of right. All of them are there at the table together, bringing their perspectives to the discussion. We have also within the House of Delegates 12 special sections that are designed to give additional voice to those groups that might otherwise be underrepresented in the House of Delegates, and you can see them up there. And I would suggest to you that this brings additional diversity to the conversation on the national level about health care. This is a representation of the breadth of issues that we face. There are some other professional organizations that have a very focused agenda. They have one or two things that they advocate on, and they can concentrate all their efforts, all their advocacy, all their resources on those one or two things. We, as physicians and as stewards, if you will, of the profession, and quite honestly, to a great extent, healthcare in this country, have a very broad plate of issues on which we have to advocate. And any one of those may float a little closer to the surface at any given time, depending on the ebb and flow of how things are going in the country. But all of them are relevant, I would say even important, and require our vigilance and our attention to shape the trajectory of those particular pieces of this large puzzle. And I would suggest to you that that trajectory progresses more rapidly now than it ever any time before. I mean, think, those of you who have a history in healthcare, think about this rate of change in any part of our healthcare system. The clinical rate of change, the technological rate of change, the IT rate of change, the payment rates of change. All of these things are changing at an increasingly rapid rate. And if we have any desire to shape the future or the trajectory, we have got to stay in it, and we have got to be able to run, if you will, as fast as the rest of the stakeholders in healthcare are prepared to run. So I honestly believe that we have an opportunity to shape the future of our profession for physicians and for our patients, and again, to some extent, to the country. The AMA recalibrated its strategic focus about 5 years ago, and I won't take you through the whole 5 years, but at this point, we organize our efforts into 3 areas that we believe have the likelihood of having the greatest impact. The top one on there, tools for the field, is what I'll generally describe as the physician-facing set of activities. How do we make the practice environment better for doctors? Tools that they can use in their office. This includes some of our advocacy that shapes the macro environment in which we practice. How do we deal with some of the data issues? How do we deal with some of the payment issues? How do you deal with just your general workflow and practice model changes that are going to be important? If we keep doing things the same way we did them 25 years ago, we get what we deserve, quite honestly. We need to be doing things differently. The second big bucket there is titled on this slide, Guiding Professional Development. It actually sprung out of our initiative around changing medical education, which I'm going to talk about a little more in a minute. But we've grouped into that everything else that relates to our professional development. AMA Code of Ethics is in there. How we develop physician leadership, how we address physician burnout, the collegial professional side of what we do is all in that big bucket. And then the third tier here are what I would call the patient-facing activities. Mission statement of the AMA is to promote the art and science of medicine and the betterment of public health. This is our betterment of public health pillar, if you will. And I'll touch on that a little bit. Our decision 5 years ago is to say, if we're genuinely going to be able to look back a generation from now and say we improved the health of this country, what does it take to do that? And we focused initially on 2 chronic diseases, diabetes and uncontrolled hypertension. I'll talk about them in just a little bit. We've added opioids to that. We'll probably add another piece or 2 to that. So it's not a boil the ocean approach. It is a very focused approach that if we put a lot of resources into this area, this will make a difference. And it will be something that we can look back on and say, we really made a difference in the health of this country. That also, in my opinion, and we'll talk a little bit about cost of health care in a minute, is a significant way in which we bend the cost curve. Of the $3 trillion we spend, some estimates suggest that 75% of all of that spending is in one way or the other related to how we have dealt and deal with chronic disease in this country. So if we're going to bend the curve, we got to do a better job at dealing with these complex chronic diseases.
Can I ask you a question there just to
You bet.
get it out? One of the problems of the American Heart Association, American Diabetes Association, is their heavy funding by
Yep.
food industry
Yep.
that has a major impact on their recommendation.
Yep.
You just Google Nutrition Advisory Board of AHA.
Yep.
It's shocking who's on there.
Right.
Does the AMA have similar constraints, if you will?
No.
So you're not in bed with big food or anything. Your funding is independent of that.
Correct.
That's good.
No, we don't have any industry funding to speak of.
Yeah.
I commend this to you very briefly. Steps Forward is a suite of online modules. There's about 40 of them there. You don't have to be a member to access these. They range everything from, I think there's 5 modules in here about physician burnout. There are several modules in here about office efficiencies. There are modules in here about how to lead a meeting in your group. If you're a group leader and you want to be effective among your group, whatever size that is, how do you lead a meeting with your group? So stepsforward.org, I don't know if it's on there somewhere, but that's what it is, it's stepsforward.org. So I commend that to you. If you believe like I do that information technology is going to be a huge influencer, and like many things, it can be a blessing or a curse, we have got to get our arms around this. I think most physicians feel like health IT is being done to them rather than for them, that it's more of a hindrance than it is a help. These are activities in which AMA has a direct stake or we fully own these activities. They span everything from Help 2047, which is a Silicon Valley very sophisticated operation that brings together serial entrepreneurs, potentially venture capitalists, to launch some big activities, all the way down to Exertia, which evaluates mobile health apps. And I'm going to talk a little. Matter is a innovation lab in Chicago. All of these things are the AMA's efforts to get the physician voice into the development of HIT early, and for us to learn from the industry, hear where the industry thinks it's going, and then help shape that trajectory. I'm going to talk a little bit about the integrated health model that I mentioned yesterday. It's this concept that we have tons and tons of data out there, but very little of it is delivered to us at the point of care in a way that it actually helps our decision making. This is designed to try to get our arms around that. So not only take our sort of standard historical data points around, let's just say, diabetes, but to begin to look at some of those other social determinants, the patient's health status, their own perspectives on what health means to them with regard to that particular illness. How often do I have to check my blood sugar, and I'm unsatisfied if you're telling me I got to check it 3 times a day. That's not making my life better. Bring all of that together. Those of you who might be interested in this is an open platform activity for the most part. There are about 6 areas that are under conversation right now. Clinicians, researchers from all over the country come together, offer their opinions, and then over the course of this year we're going to try to aggregate those and come up with sort of a common data set around these 5 or 6 different conditions. So I encourage you to do that. Now, the skeptics in the room say that's a boil the ocean type of an event. This is probably one of the most significant efforts that we could undertake, and there have been several other major organizations in this country who have attempted this and have failed. Let me show you who the partners are in this, and tell me if you think they think this is important. Those are our partners, plus about 20 more. These people think this is a big darn deal and are ready to step up and support it with their expertise, their research, and their money to try to make this happen. I think that says a lot for the
Google
state.
and Amazon going to get involved? Apple, Google, Amazon.
I'm not sure that they're on the list. Some of them have been looking and just haven't committed yet. So anyway, so that's IT, and I personally believe, and the AMA believes, that if we can get our arms around this and get information and IT working for us instead of against us, that not only will help us deliver better clinical care, but it will help reduce some of the burnout that we're talking about. Burdens on physicians, I believe, that are the externalities that cause us to be dissatisfied. Most of you have probably seen this. This was the 2011 to 2014 version of the Mayo study on physician burnout. Every specialty that was studied shows increasing rates of burnout. I know it's a little fuzzy. Family medicine started high and went higher. We're the top dotted blue line on that graph. In their survey, we're the most burned out, or we report the most metrics of burnout. It's gone up significantly. The 2017 study showed similar increase. It's really frightening. We report about half of the sense that we can control our work-life balance and we can control our work environment than the general population. Probably no surprise. And the AMA, along with others, Chris Sinski from UW, or from Wisconsin at least, is an AMA employee now. She's working on this. We partner with Shani Feld at Mayo and others who've studied this. We have science. We have evidence now. We know why physicians are dissatisfied. And it relates to the things you see up there. And I think, I didn't make this slide. I picked it out of the burnout deck that I use when I go around the country. 2 of these boxes, I think just 2 of them, relate to leadership. They say it makes a difference what the leaders in my group think about me, feel about me, how they treat me, and what they're doing to help me deliver better care and to achieve my personal professional goals in this organization. So there's a lot riding on the shoulders of those in this room that relate directly, absolutely, line of sight to how the doctors in your organization feel. We've done study after study. I'm going to show you 2 slides about the characteristics of burning out physicians. They reduce their work hours. They see fewer patients. They retire or leave in search of greener pastures or just drop out altogether. A mid-range of the cost to replace a physician in your organization is $800,000. How much could your organization invest in improving the workplace environment of their physicians to avoid one unnecessary dropped-out physician? Or physicians that are less than optimum productive. And I don't mean they got to be 90th percentile. I just mean practicing at their optimum level if they felt good about what they were doing. Or not hitting your quality metrics or your other efficiency metrics. This is a scary list. We've taken it out of our standard slide set, but I put it in because I think you guys or gals are brave. These are the results of physician performance for physicians that are burned out. This is a tragedy. We're wasting, in my opinion, the most valuable human resource in the healthcare system because we're not attending to the needs of our physicians, either organizationally, Mercy, or writ large health system. My approach, the way I'm a simple guy, I frame this in my mind at 3 levels. It's the macro level. What can we do out in the macro environment to make things better for docs, fewer regulatory burdens? Group level, what can we do within a group, within Ochsner, within Mayo, within UPenn, to make the practice environment better for physicians? And then what can we do for physicians at the individual level to help their resilience, to help them understand that they bear some responsibility in this as well and taking control of their own work environment. Again, this is a leader-oriented slide. We have to embrace and take up the mantle of improving physician well-being, generically, in order for our organization to be successful, and I would quite honestly say for health system in the United States to be successful. So, if you believe like I do that some piece of this is this external regulatory burden, the amount of boxes that we have to check, the amount of hassle we have to go through of prior authorization, which I'm going to talk about very specifically, AMA is working on all of these areas at the macro level to try to get some of this burden reduced, and we are successful. To the extent that you think maybe on a legislative Capitol Hill sort of basis, progress is very slow. On the administrative side, right now, irrespective of what you think about the current administration, they are regulatory relief, people. And we're going to get regulatory relief on a lot of these areas over the next little bit. So we're going to take advantage of that mentality with the administration to try to reduce some of the externalities of this regulatory burdens. We spent a fair amount of time in our small group last night talking about prior authorizations. AMA has done a study that says we handle 35 prior authorizations a week per physician. Each one takes an average of 30 minutes. That is 2 do the math, 16 hours, 2 work days of somebody's time, my staff's time, just to do prior authorizations, almost all of which are ultimately approved. All they've done is hassle me, delay care for my patient. Now, we talked about, I'll say the good side, and that's a mischaracterization. There are some, perhaps, proper roles for prior authorization, or, for instance, on a very simple way, the formulary. Okay? There might be some rationale behind having a more limited formulary. It's one thing if I get a piece of paper on my desk that says, they can't have Proventil, could you give them Ventolin? They can't have ProAir, could you give them Proventil? I got that. That's not a problem. Tell me what you want me to use that's essentially interchangeable. I use it. I don't care which one of those they have. But when they give you the guessing game and it takes an hour and a half back and forth and all you needed to know was give us a 500 milligram metformin instead of a 1,000 milligram metformin, and it takes an hour and a half to get that answer, that is unacceptable. That is unacceptable. So, we've met with the insurers. We brought together 17 state and specialty societies. We drafted a white paper that has 21 principles for how insurance companies can reduce the regulatory burden, and guess what? They are. New York State, the Blues anthem in New York State, eliminated prior authorization for 200 tests and treatments. In Washington State, Molina eliminated prior auth for 2,000 tests and treatments. Now that didn't directly help me in Missouri, but that helped the docs in Washington in the Molina system a lot. And it's directly because of efforts like this. And this is spilling over into others. So we can make a difference in these externalities. The other thing, some of you are probably aware that Anthem and others, actually United is probably the second biggest duck in this puddle, have instituted a whole bunch of what they regard as cost-cutting measures, one of which, for instance, is payment for the 25 modifier. So if you see an E&M visit and the person says, by the way, I've got this ditzel on my arm, could you take it off? And you say, of course I can. You charge a 25 modifier on your E&M. You charge the procedure and then you modify your E&M with 25. Anthem wanted to reduce the reimbursement for the E&M by 50%. We just cut that, 50% off the E&M reimbursement if you're doing something that requires 25 modifier. And we said, no, can't do that. So AMA engaged with them, as did several other professional organizations. We even met with them in Chicago, had some of the leadership, Anthem's leadership, come to Chicago, sit down with Jack Resnick, our chair-elect of the board, happens to be a dermatologist. It's a big deal for dermatologists. So he was a good person for that. And they said, okay, fine. We'll drop it down to 25%. We'll just cut it 25%. Don't worry about this. We were just kind of kidding about this 50% thing. And we said, no. And there are technical reasons for that in the CPT and RUC processes, which all of you love. They already factor that in. They already say an E&M and a ditzel removal often occur at the same time. We know you're going to bill a 25 modifier. We'll factor that down a little bit, and then it's good. We don't have to mess with any of these other discounts. We continue to work with them on both the state and national level. I testified in the Missouri House and Senate both on this very issue because the physicians in the Missouri legislature brought forward bills that said Anthem can't do this in Missouri. We worked with them on the national level, and they finally said, you're right, we're not going to do this. So now the modifier 25 discount off the table. And they're at the table talking about several other, we believe, are egregious and ill-advised activities like retroactive ED denials. You're aware of those, probably. Person comes in the emergency department, they decide wasn't necessary, they just deny payment. So we're working with them. We can make a difference. The right issue, the right approach, we make a difference. The other thing we did that is huge, and it's going to come back around at the later part of this conversation if I keep moving, is we blocked the mega mergers last year. There are 5 really big insurance companies in this country, United and you don't see all 4 of them on there, Anthem, Cigna, Aetna, and Humana. That's the big 5. Aetna and Humana we're going to merge. Anthem and Cigna we're going to merge. That would take the big 5 down to 3. If you think it's hard to deal with them now, if you think that part of the reason we don't have any power is because they have more, how much more are 3 going to have than 5? It's terrible. They will beat down our prices. We estimated and gave testimony at the federal level that the Anthem-Cigna merger alone would reduce payments to providers by $2 billion and payments to physicians by $500 million a year if this merger was to take place. And the Aetna-Humana is not much different than that. We were able to block this on the national level, and they have said, we're not fighting it anymore, that's not what we're going to do. That's a real win. And that would not have happened if the AMA had not been in a convening role to not only add its voice to those of many other specialty and state societies to say, this is bad policy for health care in the United States. Don't go any farther with the mega merger. Okay, I'm going to go through these really quick. This is the professional development side. I want to highlight the issues around our Change Med Ed. 5 years ago, we put up $11 million and brought in 11 schools, 2 of which are represented in this room, and said, go out and make medical education better. We've been training, structurally at least, training physicians in this country the same way for 100 years since the Flexner Report. It's 2 years of undergrad, or not undergrad, 2 years of preclinical, 2 years clinical, and off to residency, 2 years clinical. We don't do anything in this country the same way we did it 100 years ago. We should not be educating our medical students the same way. We are not preparing them. One of my cutesy little lines is, it's not enough to be a good clinician or even a great clinician any longer. You have to have other skills in order to function in our current environment. This was so wildly successful that we added another 21 schools. We now have 32 in this consortium. It is an amazing amount of energy at these schools. There are other schools that want to adopt some of these also. One piece of this speaks to what we've talked about generically in this meeting already, and that is, what do 21st century physicians need to know about the system in which they practice? And what would you like them to know when they walk in your door to be a fully functional physician in a high-performing health system? They need to know this. They need to know about team-based care. They need to know about population health. They need to know about HIT and how to harness the power of that. They need to know about the business side of medicine. They don't have to know as much as you know, but they need to know this much, or they won't understand why you're asking them to do what you're asking them to do. So we wrote the textbook on health system science. It's the third science. It's, we do great at the, what I'll call the basic sciences, the anatomy, the physiology. We do pretty good at the clinical sciences, the cardiology, the pulmonology. We don't do anything with the health system sciences to speak of until now. So this is being taken up by medical schools and some residencies around the country to introduce this into their curriculum. Improving the health, these are the parts of that pillar that I talked to you about. Diabetes, specifically with emphasis on preventing the progression of pre-diabetes to diabetes. 1 out of every 3 adults in this country are pre-diabetic. 84 million people. 90% of them don't know it. And so what we've done is we've tried to drive awareness of pre-diabetes and say, if you're pre-diabetic, go to the website, take this little 1-minute test. You're pre-diabetic, go see your doctor. Let him or her do some more definitive testing and help begin to coach you so that you don't become diabetic. It is avoidable, isn't it, Joe?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's our environment.
This sounds kind of goofy, sounds a little hokey. Do I have prediabetes.org? Who in the world's going to go to that? 560,000 plus. We introduced this, and this is just on the website. Samsung Health put this on their app. It took us 18 months to get 560,000 hits on our website. It took 1 week to get 300,000 hits on the Samsung Health app. 1 week, 300,000. We talk about social media. Target BP is a collaboration between the evil empire of the American Heart Association and the AMA. And basically it is to pick the low-hanging fruit of uncontrolled hypertension. 90 million people in the country have hypertension, 30 million are uncontrolled, and these are not street people in Philadelphia. These are people that say, I have a regular source of care. I know who my doctor is. That's Dr. Barbe. I see him all the time. And they're running around with blood pressure of 150 systolic. We can do better than that. And so this is designed to increase awareness among the public and physicians about the importance of monitoring blood pressure and managing it more aggressively. And whether you believe in the new guidelines or not, I don't really care. I don't care if you think your target's 130 or 140. It isn't 150. I think we can agree it's not 150. Anything down in that range is fine. Move them down. We talked about opioids. You saw this slide yesterday. The problem clearly now is synthetic opioids and heroin. Many more deaths from those, and these are not additive, these are independent of the deaths that we see. How many of them included heroin, how many included fentanyl or carfentanil, how many included essentially prescription opioids. That's where the problem is right now. We have got to have better resources for pain management, better resources for substance use disorders, and we do have some opportunities still with regard to reducing our prescribing, and we talked about that yesterday very, very well. Gun safety is kind of the last little tiny piece of this because it is so timely, and it seems to become timely more frequently now after each mass shooting that we experience. The AMA's policies around this revolve around these 4 pieces. We really think that more research needs to be done. CDC has been constrained over the last 15 years almost from doing gun research. We don't think that is the intent of the law that they say has restricted them. So we've got to get some research about what will really help, not just a knee-jerk reaction. We've had long-standing policy on gun safety. That's guns in the home, and how do you lock them up, and how do you keep the ammo away, and how do you keep them out of the hands of kids, and how physicians should be unconstrained in talking with our patients about gun safety, particularly pediatric patients. It's identifying your own patients who might have mental health problems that shouldn't have guns in the home. Had that conversation with a patient just this last week. Said, he came in depressed. Do you have guns? Yes. Give them to your sister till we get you through this. Safer guns, that's the ban on assault weapons, ban on high-capacity magazines, modifications that increase the rate of fire, that sort of thing. And then this whole issue around mental health. We don't have our arms around it in the opioid realm. We do not have our arms around it in the gun safety realm. Okay, real brief. I'm going fast. Healthcare costs. I would suggest to you that a lot of the conversation that we're having today relates to the fact that healthcare costs so much in this country. And we can talk about when that started, which we're going to, but payers and patients have tried their ways to get their arms around this whole cost thing. We spend roughly $3 trillion a year. If you peel this back, some of you have seen this, let me show this slide before, go back to 2010, it was only 2.75, but it was still about 70% of our GDP, irrespective of whether GDP means anything. That's about what it was, and $8,900 a person. If you roll it back another 10 years, it's 13% of GDP, and a third, well, a little more than a third, but about a third of what we spend now. It's tripled nearly, 2.5 times at least, in 15 years, on top of a big number already. If you peel it back 20 years, look at that, in 1980, all of healthcare in this country, $246 billion. And in 1960, prior to Medicare and Medicaid, that's the statistic, 5% of the GDP, $27 billion total healthcare spending. So that's part of the problem. This is what the trajectory looks like in terms of a per capita spend compared to other Western countries. We've talked about that before. The percent of GDP slide looks the same. I mean, it's almost identical. And this is a scary slide, I think. We're pretty good with the rest of the world up to age 50. What happens after age 50, and how many of those after 50s do we have now? You guys in this room know. Aging, 10,000 people a day are aging into Medicare, turning 65 every day. That has some pretty significant financial implications for our country if we don't manage that population. And what are at least 2 of the pieces of that? Chronic disease and end-of-life care, feudal care. This is government spending. Every other category of government spending is flat or slightly down. Only thing that's going up is health care, and it's going up at an alarming rate. And so if you wonder why Congress keeps saying we've got to cut this, we've got to cut that, we can't put more money into this, we can't cover more people, that's why. Here's how we spend the money. Most of you have seen pie charts like this. It's basically just point out about a third on hospital care, 15 or 16% is on direct physician reimbursement. So when somebody, anybody, Medicare, health plan comes to you and say, we're going to fix the health cost problem by cutting doctors' compensation 2% or 5% or the mind exploding 10%, what difference is that going to make in that total pie? Almost none. That is not the solution. So, I'm going to pause for a second and ask you just briefly, so what are the components of how we really bend the cost curve? Some of you have ideas probably. This is not a quiz or a test, I just kind of know what everybody's thinking. David?
On that pie chart, where's prevention?
Oh, good. It was kind of woven in there, but you're right. It's not called out as a specific cost category because it falls in amongst all the rest. So here, go ahead, Joe.
No, you asked a question, but
I
go
did.
ahead. You can go on if you want.
In the interest of time, there are lots of studies that have been done, and almost all of them suggest there is, some people like to use the term waste, I'll say inefficiencies, to be kind, in our healthcare system that could represent as much as 30% of our total spend. If we could cut total spend by 5% on a $3 trillion spend, that's actually real money. We don't have to cut out 30% to fix this problem. We cut out 3 or 5%, we fix the problem. And these are the categories. And these are some of the areas that large groups have an opportunity to influence. We should be more efficient. We talked, though, last night, about how if you go across systems, like especially the VA, so you bounce back and forth between Mercy and the VA, I do it all, VA does it all, because you can't ever get their information. Anyway, there is some fraud. There are some inflated prices. There probably are some prevention failures, and you could make that number bigger if you think we don't do preventive health well. There are lots of ways that we can bend the cost curve, and it isn't necessarily, well, let's just cut down the per unit reimbursement that we give to providers, hospitals, or doctors. Healthcare reform, I'm going to skip those slides. This is the effect of the Affordable Care Act. Pre-2009, we had 50 million people in this country uninsured. The ACA, through expansion of Medicaid in 35 states and the institution of the exchanges and the individual mandate and the employer mandate, we picked up about 20 million. So it means even after that, at this point, we still have about 30 million uninsured in this country. And I think most of us think that there probably are ways that we can continue to do better. But you know what the national debate has been around the Affordable Care Act. It has not been a cakewalk. And this is what we've accomplished. AMA doesn't want to see those accomplishments unwound. And these are kind of the 9 talking points that I've gone around the country for the last year since the election and since the Republicans started Congress, mostly started, this repeal thing or repeal and replace. The top 5 I think are most important because we have been successful. If you don't think you can shape things, we have been successful at protecting these gains, the top 4, 5 red ones. We have been able to derail, and this is not a partisan comment, it's just a practical comment, the Republicans plan to dismantle the ACA by and large by ensuring coverage. There's one exception to that. We are working hard to increase or improve the affordability. These $10,000 deductibles not really affordable. Even the premiums are not affordable. To adequately fund safety net programs, we now have got a 10-year extension on CHIP through 2 different pieces of legislation. So CHIP is solid for 10 years. Medicaid has not changed yet. Hasn't gone to a block grant. Wasn't cut by $800 billion, which is what the House and Senate plans both called for. Stabilizing the insurance market means getting more insurance companies into the exchanges. Third of the counties in this country only have 1 offering in the exchange. The vast majority of counties in Missouri have 1 offering. That's no choice for physicians, that's no choice for our patients, and it leaves that system very vulnerable that if that last insurance company pulls out of the exchange, then there is no option in the exchange. So we have to stabilize that market. And we need to maintain the so-called market reforms that are very patient-facing, patient protections, like you can't be excluded for prior existing conditions. This is the timeline. The process in both the House and the Senate was done in a budget reconciliation manner because that only requires 51 votes in the Senate instead of 60. So whatever the House started with had to be something that would meet the test of a budget reconciliation bill in the Senate. You can only change spending in a budget reconciliation bill. You cannot technically change policy. You can only change spending. You can spend more, you can spend less, but you can't change policy. I'll tell you how that happens though. So the House debated it. They finally, in May, passed their version of this bill by 1 vote. They browbeat enough Republican congressmen and women that they could get it over the line by 1 vote, so at least it would get kicked into the Senate. The House could say, we did our job, we passed this big revamp of the ACA. Went into the Senate, and to make a long story short, it finally died in the Senate in late September. One piece of that was a vote that came up in July where John McCain was the one holdout vote, and so that particular bill didn't advance. Another bill came up, it died. This bottom line, at the end of the year, I think all of you are aware of the tax bill that was passed. This whole thing is also controversial, and you know, does it help out? Is it a bailout for large companies? But it does cut the tax rates for individuals. In that bill was effective repeal of the individual mandate to purchase insurance. How could they do that in a tax bill? You know how?
I have no idea. Make the penalty zero.
Make the penalty zero. So the only lever or leverage they had for the individual mandate is because if you didn't do it, you got a penalty. Make the penalty zero. That doesn't repeal the provision. It repeals the penalty, which is a funding thing, so they could pass it. So we now have it repeal the individual mandate. What the effect of that will be is to raise the number of uninsured between 5 and 10 million more, because people will not buy if they're not being coerced or forced into buying. A Republican talking point is we don't want to force people to buy something they don't want and they can't afford. They don't want it, they can't afford it, we shouldn't make them do it. That's only half right. People want health insurance, by and large. Everybody understands the risk of being uninsured. And nobody actually wants to be uninsured. It's just the value proposition for them. The young and healthy think they're bulletproof, or it's not worth it to them, whatever the cost was going to be. So it's not affordable. Agreed. Do you not want it? The answer is, I don't think that's the case. So we got to figure out how to make that affordable, because what's going to happen with the repeal of the mandate is the young and healthy drop out. What does that leave in the risk pool? The old and the sick. What does that do to the premiums in the pool? Drives them up, so people that need it and want it can't afford it because the cost has gone up because the young and healthy are out of the risk pool. Patients before politics was our mantra, and partnerships we talked about in our group last night. How do you do it? What if it was only the AMA that was saying this? We'd have whatever amount of effect we have. But when you join with a coalition inside and outside of healthcare, and I went around the country early part of this year with representatives, usually a couple of them and me, and we'd get a couple of patients together and we'd hold a media event. And we would mostly, I'd get up and make a few remarks, and then we would turn it over to the patients and let them tell their story about their issues with coverage and what happened when they had it or what happened when they didn't. Very powerful. And this is what stopped the Republican repeal and replace activities. And it is dead for now, mostly, because there are bigger fish to fry until after the November election in midterms. Then it may heat up again. But we have to keep an eye, and the other thing is, they can't do anything with the budget bills any longer. That's also off the table until sometime next year. So we're safe for a few months, probably, but this is not gone. Other things we got done in the budget bill, okay, that passed a couple of weeks ago, we repealed the IPAB. I think we have alluded to that. This was the Independent Payment Advisory Board that was set up under the Affordable Care Act that set up an independent commission that if certain spending thresholds in Medicare were triggered, this group, independent of Congress, could go in and say, this is how we're going to cut spending in Medicare. Spent too much, we're just going to cut. We're going to cut here, and we're going to here, and here, and we're going to cut your account 10%, and that's just what we're going to do. Congress that could say yay or nay, they couldn't tinker. We got that repealed. Huge deal. Huge deal. We got the CHIP extension. We got funding for NIH and VA that was threatened to be cut. It was a really good health care bill, all under the guise of a budget bill. So that's how things happen. This is the next moving part that probably can't happen in the next 6 months, but 20 states have said, now that the individual mandate is repealed, the whole rest of the Affordable Care Act is null and void. Number one, there were not severability clauses in it, and if those of you who are legally minded know that if one part of a contract is declared invalid, unless there's a severability clause, the whole contract can be invalid. So they're arguing that. They're also arguing that the individual mandate was such a critical pillar of the program that you can't have a program without the individual mandate. So they're trying to take it apart from the judicial side. These are the last couple of slides. I added these last night from a slide deck that I reviewed recently from the advisory board. Some of these are not very good, and then I'm going to end on a high note, and then I'll pass my time. If you look at what drives patients' access, over half of these are, I want to get in right now or when I want to. Only one of these, really, is what you and I would think of as really good medicine, and that is my provider explained to me what was going on. That's our part of it. Everything else is structural. Everything else is structural on there, or cost. It's how much does it cost? How quick could I get in compared to when I wanted to get in? That's what's driving it. This is the worst slide of the whole deck. I almost took it out, but you guys are tough. This is loyalty to your primary care physician. How many people would follow their primary care physician to the location? We think they all would. 9%. 9% will follow you if you move. Maybe if you move across the street, but if you move very far, they're not coming. How likely are you to stay with your primary care doc for the next year? Only half. These are scary things. And there means that there are other things that are driving them, which was on the previous slide. And if we don't think about that, we're at the whim of the next person that just came from Phil's practice to my practice because they got tired of seeing Phil. Or Phil moved, and so they saw me instead of following him. And last slide, even among patients who score high on loyalty, which is like 7 or above, maybe 8 or above on a 10-point scale, even the highly loyal patients have seen providers or sought care in over 2 systems in the last year when those are available in their market. Some markets you only have one provider, but these are kind of scary things. When we're talking about managing our populations, we want to do population health. I got my 10,000 people in my group. I'm going to manage them. Well, no, they're going here and they're going there and they're seeing some other cardiologist and they're going to an orthopedist and they're getting a hip put in that my orthopedist wouldn't have done. Market disruption. So I talked about this slide. This was a slide I showed before. We were able to block the horizontal integration among mega insurance companies. What have they done? Vertical. Brand new, emerging. We don't know the impact of this because we have never seen this before. CVS, pharmacy chain, and PBM is going to buy an insurance company for $67 or $69 billion, one of the largest mergers in this country. Cigna is going to buy Express Scripts, equally monstrous merger. How that aligns payment and pharmaceuticals and choice for patients and cost driving for providers, scary. We've been out front that we think the FTC and DOJ need to put the hold on this until they can gather more information, which is going to be hard because it's unprecedented. And last but not least, the triumvirate. Look at the top quote on that slide. These are all quotes from the initial, or maybe the follow-up press release that these guys did. What does Warren Buffett think about us? We're hungry tapeworms on the American economy. That's what he thinks about healthcare in this country. And you might be hard to argue with that. You might be hard to argue with that. These guys are serious. Those 3 companies employ 1.1 million people altogether. They've got all the resources that you could ever want. If resources will drive a new innovative delivery of care for their million employees, they're going to do it. These guys are not known to fail. They're pretty successful, I think, by any metric. This is going to really be. They're in the process of forming an insurance company. Effectively, is what they're doing. And they're interviewing for their CEO for this new company now. They will resource it, and they will insure their 1.1 million employees. And as soon as they figure that out, they're the next mega insurer. So, end on a high note. This is my slide. I put these in at 9, right before I gave it to Michelle. My son graduated from osteopathic college last May. I was invited by his dean to give the commencement address, which was really neat experience, of course. And I was thinking about what I could tell those bright young med school graduates that would actually mean something. And I thought about, and this came from our conversation last night, Phil, thank you, about the why and why they went into medical school. And generically, and we got a lot of different answers around the table last night, but generically it's because they want to make a difference. And if you want to make a difference in your world, your little piece of the world, you lead. And for physicians, we have a really unique opportunity because we are seen as de facto leaders. Our patients come to us for leadership. The nurses turn to us for leadership. The coworkers in our office come to us for leadership. The hospitals come to us for leadership. We are leaders. The only question for us, Wanda, got it right, what kind of leaders are we going to be? What kind of influence are you going to have on your piece of the world? Whether it's a huge piece, well, maybe not so huge, as president of the AMA, or whether you're just you're a group leader, or you're a department chair, what kind of influence are you going to have on your part of the world? This is a Jack Welch quote, retired CEO of GE. We need to grow ourselves as leaders, but at some point, it's about growing others. And though most of us in this room are at a point where we have a real opportunity to cultivate those around us to step up and be a more positive contributor to their environment as well. True leaders don't create followers, we create leaders. And I use this as my sort of philosophical line on my AMA presidential inauguration program, and it's what I'm going to leave you with. We have a real opportunity to help others dream more, learn more, do more. That's how we're going to change things. That's how we're going to bring another generation along behind us that's going to carry the torch, that's going to take over where we're leaving off. And I really think that is the key. We have a real opportunity to mentor our profession. And that's what I think is going to make us stronger. Thanks. Sorry I went over.
Good job.